You're listening to the Fooled by the Root podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is your host, Heidi Marble. I have been looking so forward to talking to Corissa Saint Laurent. She is a holistic brand advisor and international speaker, inspiring and empowering entrepreneurs, leaders, and creatives to light up their lives so they can light up the world. She has over 20 years of entrepreneurial experience, business experience in marketing, branding, business development, combined with professional training in mind, body, energy work. Her business life has always been a deep reflection of her personal goals and interests, and she is forever learning, growing, and sharing her knowledge, insight, and expertise with others. Corissa was adopted from South Korea at the age of 3 and grew up in New Hampshire and Los Angeles. At the age of 37, she met her birth mother and sister, leading her on the most unexpected adventure of her life. Welcome, Corissa.
Thank you so much, Heidi. It's wonderful to be with you.
Oh my gosh, on our intro call, there's just so much we need to dive into, but I would really love to start with your adoption story, if you don't mind taking us, because 3 years old, that's pretty old. So can you structure that for us? What was happening at that time in your life, and what can you tell us?
Sure. It's always so interesting talking about it, because I obviously am talking about it retrospectively, right? I don't remember anything from that time period, although I know some 3-year-olds have some memories. I don't have any memories from that time period. So for me, it's just, what could I have been experiencing then? What have I found out and discovered through the different healing work I've done and the different reflection that I've had. So at 3 years old, and the third thing that I've used in understanding that time period of my life is having had a child who's now 10. But when he was 3, I got to experience a 3-year-old. I didn't have younger siblings. I didn't grow up with younger cousins. So I didn't have a lot of time with toddlers. And once I had a child of my own and actually spent time with a 3-year-old, it was a really profound moment for me, period of my life, to know that was me, that I actually was that developed and had, and had this connection both between, him to me, which I felt very deeply, and me to him. So that was a really interesting way to kind of see what it must have been like for me.
Yeah, I think a lot of the adopted people experience that. I know when I had my son, it was the same experience, just looking at this baby and thinking, oh my goodness, what happened to cause relinquishment for myself? And I'm sure you had the same thought.
Yes, exactly. So I know that the things I do know that I experienced were night terrors. So when I first came, I would have night terrors, nightmares that my parents couldn't wake me up from. So I would just be screaming, crying in my sleep, and they couldn't wake me up, and they would just hold me and rock me until I just calmed down and fell out of it. So I know that for the first year or so, it was that. I don't know if it was every night, but it was, consistently enough so that I realized in reflecting on that I was experiencing deep trauma, didn't know what to do, how to talk to. I mean, I spoke a different language than my parents, so I couldn't even talk to them and tell them with their understanding of what I was experiencing, even if I had words for it, which I probably didn't have the right words to share at the moment, but maybe I could have said I'm scared.
Right. It's just that extra barrier.
Yeah. And, just even a simple thing of like, I'm scared, and they could have understood that. But I couldn't share verbally with them. I think I was also frightened to probably share anything that wasn't just like, oh, here I am. I'm the perfect child. You don't want to let me go. You don't want to leave me. And I've heard from other adoptees a similar whether they remember the training or whether it's something that they've just read about and talked to other adoptees about of this kind of fear, deep and inherent, that you're going to be given away again. So whether that comes from a training that kind of happens at orphanages of like, hey, you need to behave, you need to be good, you need to be this and that for your new parents. I'm not sure what happened to me. I'm not sure what I was told. I do know that when my parents said, I came into the airport, I was flown from Seoul to JFK and in New York, and my parents and my brother received me there. And I came off the plane with, 30 some odd other adoptees and, with, a couple volunteers, which I'll tell you a story in a second about those volunteers. Really interesting how life just comes around. So I was one of many on this one trip. And they said that all the kids were screaming, crying, as you can imagine, and how traumatic that flight must have been. These kids not knowing where they're going. Babies are screaming, kids are rolling around on the ground and just, in a state of panic. And I was just like a statue. They said I was just like calm. And I just walked very slowly and calmly. And I which was told to me like a positive, like,
right.
Oh,
this isn't good.
Right. I mean, so my mother would retell this story as a positive attribute of me. I'm like, oh, she was so calm and she was so peaceful and just walking through, and everybody else is like freaking out. And I used to believe that story too, until I realized what trauma does to the body and how frozen I was in fear at that time, which was now, makes total sense with the night terrors, that it was all coming out then.
Right.
But during the day, I couldn't express it. And I didn't even really feel it in my consciousness until much later on.
Oh, Corissa, thank you for sharing that. It just adds so many more layers to think about being from another country, having another language, having to make this long journey, and then being frozen in that trauma and not having the language to express what you're feeling. So when did you begin to realize that adoption was affecting you? Or can you take us through a little bit more of your childhood, maybe your adolescence? Mm-hmm. Because clearly you're being raised by white parents.
I was.
Tell us like what all of that was like for you.
I was raised with white parents and a white brother. My brother was their biological child before they adopted me. And I grew up in a town, a community of mostly white people. So not even no other Asians, but no other different than white. So it was I always knew I was different. I always knew that I stood out, and I hated that about myself. I hated that about life. And I think a lot of kids go through a similar thing of where you just want to blend in. You just want to be like the pack, right? You want to be like everybody else. You want to be accepted. And for me, that was something I couldn't change. It wasn't like, oh, I could just put on a different outfit and pretend I'm part of the goth crowd, to fit in there. It's just like, I can't change this. So it was a difficult adolescence. I think, I don't know when I really remember or recall being Korean or being Asian or being different. I do remember I remember a time when we were at a family friend's house, and I was probably 5-ish, 6-ish. And we had Chinese takeout at the house. And they weren't even chopsticks that were given. I mean, this was the 70s. I don't even know if they gave chopsticks to the food. They're just like, okay, you're not culturally ready for this. White people. But they were the skewers for the meat. Yes. That come with the food. And I picked up the skewers and was using them like chopsticks. And everyone was commenting like, oh, look at, she can still use chopsticks. And I didn't even know what I was doing consciously. I was just kind of doing it. And so people would point things out all the time. They would point out things like that. I had neighbors, certainly people in town, pointing out the difference. It's hard to hide from, my adoptive mother's blonde, blue eyes. Here I am. So there's no hiding that, that I'm different. And so it was always pointed out. And I always knew I was different. I was often, called Oriental princess and a little China doll. And so I knew, but I didn't, I would say, consciously feel the effects until I was probably junior high, feeling really self-conscious. And that's just the time that we all start to feel self-conscious, I think, in general, right? About all the things, anything that is different about you. So it wasn't any different for me in that respect. It was just that was the big difference for me. And I didn't have anybody else to feel alike or akin to. So I think, when you're different, but you've got other bookworm friends, or you're different, but you've got other, metalhead friends that you can, or whatever, you're
relate
different.
to.
Yeah. And you can relate to this other group of people who's different in that same way. Then at least there's some opportunity there to not feel so alone. But I felt very alone in my identity. And so that fractured my identity big time. I hated my appearance, hated how I looked, myself because of that, because unfortunately, and I don't like that life is this way, but unfortunately our appearance and our looks do end up becoming such a huge part of our identity, our sense of confidence and self-worth. And so all of those things are really pretty crushed during my adolescence, and led to, a lot of self-destructive behaviors.
Yeah, Chris, and the woman sitting before me today, you just are beaming with light and love, just as you stated in your bio. You are just full of light. And I know the journey to get there, and probably the journey you're continuing, has not been easy. But I think it would be really interesting to explore how you came to find out more about your identity, become more secure in your person. And also I'd like to get into the energy work and the mind body. I'm sure that all of those things that you do today were part of your journey and possibly still are.
Oh, 100%. I think for me, the trauma of my adoptive household. So now stepping into the life I came into, not what I left, divorce within my family, my parents, my mother, my adoptive mother moved away across the country when I was 14. And so I was, experienced another abandonment. It was those traumas that honestly, forced me into the bottom of the barrel. And I don't, I always accept life as what it is. This was my life. This is my life as it unfolds. And I am grateful for everything I've been through, because I wouldn't be who I am today, sitting here with you, if I hadn't gone through all of that. So I say that because so many of the dark times and those hopeless times and those moments when you feel like this isn't worth it. Like, this is just not, I didn't sign up for this, and this is not worth it, and I'm ready to check out. If you can, at least for me, getting to a place where we all have this ability to transform our thoughts, our feelings, our energy, our physical state, our conditions of our life. But when you're so disempowered by life, by circumstances in life, it can obviously feel like I'm so powerless. And I lived so much of my adolescence, or up to, I would say, my adolescence, not knowing I had this power, not knowing I could at all tap into that. I had a traumatic brain injury when I was 16 years old. And this was, again, unexpected, not something I necessarily wanted to happen, but it was such a crazy gift in my life, because during my healing in the ICU, I heard a voice, and the voice started speaking for me to the nurses, to the technicians, and telling them that, I didn't want certain things done. And I'm just listening to this going, what is going on? Like, I'm 16. I don't know what I'm talking about. But this voice was speaking for me, and it was advocating for me, and it was advocating for my and I trusted it too. It wasn't just like, oh, who is this and what's going on? And I don't want this voice speaking for me. I completely trusted it. It was advocating for what I knew was best for me. And I just kind of let it go. I just let it happen. And that voice continued to grow and become stronger through my healing period when I got home. And then I realized that this voice isn't something from outside of me. It was this a long forgotten voice of my intuition and of my higher self that was speaking up, and was just shaken into just saying, we're here. The collective you is here. We're here to support you, strengthen you, advocate for you. You're not alone. And I just, it shocked me to the core, because it wasn't anything, like I said, that I expected. But then I realized that I asked for that accident. I asked for this tragedy to happen, because I needed to be woken up in such a powerful way. Otherwise, I would have continued on. And I did, believe me, I didn't. And it's just like at that moment go, okay, all my self-destructive behavior is done. And I definitely still continued on that path too, but it was lit, and so I imagined it. And I still do kind of have this analogy in my mind, is that it's like I was in this dark tunnel, and then all of a sudden, I have this light that's shining. And sometimes I would go around a corner and it would be dark and I couldn't see that light, but it's still there and it's still shining. And so it was that realization that the light is always there, that my inner self, my innermost knowing, my soul has always been there to be my support, to be my guide, and to lift me out of those dark times. And I continued to have, a few more dark corners in my life from that moment, certainly, but always returned to that knowing and to the understanding that I have this power within me to make those changes that are they're really my birthright, are all of our birthrights, to be able to live the life we want to live and to not be a victim to our circumstances.
That was so beautiful. I was so with you every moment, thinking about that voice that you actually didn't understand where it was coming from, but it was coming from you. I think so many of us can relate to what is that noise? And it's our truest self trying to erupt and to come out in some way, shape, or form. And I think that's so powerful to share that is possible and important, and it helps us navigate the darkness. Mm-hmm. So I love what you said too, that you are a seeker, that you love like the mystery of things as well. And I think that desire to seek and to take victimhood and transform it into power. Wow. Like that, having curiosity about what happened to you. Why did it happen? Who gave birth to me? I feel like the seeking of all of that is empowering, even if it's hard. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, 100%. The journey is whatever we want to make it, right? And we can do and choose what we think is easier. For me, it was drinking and partying and numbing out in that way. And I numbed out in other ways too. But, the numbing out seemed easier, but it was infinitely harder on me, on my body, on my spirit, on my life, than it would have been to just face everything in those moments that I needed to face them, instead of turning to alcohol, turning into myself. Even though it feels like the hardest thing in the world. And so over time, I've learned to turn in to myself at those times, and to not turn to those things that seem so much easier. And we have countless ways and means, right, to distract ourselves from our truth, from our that hard path. But the path becomes easier, right, as we choose it. And as we listen to that voice that sounds like so foreign to us, the more we listen to it, then we hear ourselves in it, right? And so that just with all things, the more time we spend with it, the more familiar it becomes, and the less it seems hard and foreign. You think about sometimes when you go to a new place and you're driving, you're like, where am I? What's going on? And it feels like it takes forever to get there. And then you finally get there. And then on the way back, you're like, oh, that was fast. You get home in, much less time. So perception, because the first time it was foreign to you. You didn't know where you were going. You felt lost. It feels longer. But once you have some familiarity, it doesn't feel as long, doesn't feel as hard. If you've got the strength enough to choose to take on the journey, it becomes really fun. It becomes a place where you, through the seeking, like you were saying, you become empowered. So it's all self-fulfilling. And it's like anything too, where, for those of maybe you have some listeners who've not gone through the adoptive experience, but we've all gone through things of where we've wanted to achieve something. Let's say, like, you want to get an A in this class, or you wanted to get that promotion, and we work hard towards getting and achieving that thing. And you can get driven by that final accomplishment, that thing you want. But you can also really enjoy the process and the learning along the way, even if you don't ever get that thing. And I think that the seeking, whether that's search for birth family, for me, it was just finding my center and my sense of self-worth and identity. And that all had to come first before I could even muster the courage to go look for my birth family. But all of that, the curiosity has to, it doesn't have to, but it drives it. It did certainly drive it for me, to the point of where it did become fun. I became this seeker of self and of truth and of things greater, of figuring out the mystery behind, mystery of life. So before I found out the mystery of my birth family, and I just came up with this or found this out, figured this out probably 2 months ago, because I'm writing a book right now. And in the writing process, I have remembered certain things that I had not remembered at all. And as I'm writing, all of a sudden I'm typing these words and going, oh, wow. Yeah, I totally forgot about that. And this is interesting. And I keep going. And one of those is a sillier example of those memories. But when I was in high school, and maybe even younger, I collected the Time Life book series called Mysteries of the Unknown. I don't know how old you are, but this was released in, I think it began in the late 70s.
I'm old enough by far.
Yeah. So it was this book series where it was a subscription. So you would get a new hardcover book I don't remember how often they came. And the series was called Mysteries of the Unknown. And it was all about alien encounters, psychic phenomena, the powers of healing, all of these mystical subjects that I didn't even remember until I was typing. And it came through my fingers that I had that book series, that I just loved them so much that I was just, enamored by them. And remembering back, wow, okay, I've been a seeker for so much longer than I thought I have been. And I've been mystified by the unknown for so much longer. And I think it is because of my story or because of my past, because I didn't have the courage at that time yet to explore my birth story and the pain of my relinquishment and abandonment. But I had the courage enough to explore these other kinds of mysteries and was fascinated with figuring those kinds of things out. And it was part of the journey of leading me to the birth search.
Yeah. And before we talk about your reunification, I really want to talk to you a little bit more about the voices. I think that sometimes when I'm learning, as I'm going through processes of therapy and talking to other adopted people, is when you hear a voice really strongly, it could also be a trauma response. And I think trying to figure out what is the truest voice, like the wise mind, like the intuition that is not all knowing, but that center for us, because I think it's really hard sometimes to know what we're actually hearing when we have so much trauma and so much misinformation. And so I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that. Like, do you ever feel confused by what you're hearing, or is it really clear to you that, oh, this is my truest self speaking now? It's not something else that's triggering me or activating me.
Nowadays, it's very clear, but what the more muddled my life, mind, emotion, my, the whole state of myself, my mental, emotional, spiritual self, the more muddled that was, the harder it was to discern those voices. But now, which is why it's really important to focus on how we can be this clear vessel, a clear channel. And for me, alcohol was, the fastest way to muddle that channel up, so that I couldn't hear, couldn't discern, didn't have that clarity or that purity of the vessel. Lots of other drugs and other things that were involved during those times as well. So having that clear physical channel, and that could also be impacted by other things, other chemicals too, food and drink chemicals that are not necessarily illicit, could for sure muddle that experience, as can our thoughts. Our own thoughts can muddle the inner voice, our intuition, because those thoughts are the voices, like you were saying, of that are loud and come from all of these different influences. There's a great book and a great technique and modality called internal family systems. Have you heard of that?
How have I not heard of this? It sounds very interesting.
Oh, you're going to just dive right into that, Heidi. It is
I'm excited.
Fascinating. And internal family systems was created by a psychotherapist named Dr. Richard Schwartz. He realized through working with his trauma clients, who were a lot of eating disorder clients, people on the brink of suicide, all schizophrenics, people who had multiple personality disorders, as it was called back then when he discovered this. And through his work and through his understanding of the mind and the mind body, he realized that what the people we kind of lump into the multiple personality or dissociative personality disorder category are just as on the spectrum of us, because we all have these voices, what he calls parts, that develop over time. Some of them develop in a healthy way. And if you've been through trauma, then they develop in an unhealthy way. But we can learn to work with those parts, learn to befriend them, learn to listen to them, and to also embrace them so that they can stand down, because most of those parts are protective. And it's a fast, I won't go super deep into IFS, but look it up and check it out. There's ways, certainly, even without working with a therapist, you can work on these things yourself, which I love about the therapy, because I'm super into, self-help, not just because it's something I teach, but it's something that's helped, that I utilize. I feel like the more we're involved in the medicine, the more we're involved in the therapy, the more it works, or the better it works. And the more we gain from it, because you gain that empowerment from it too, of going, oh yeah, I know now how to deal with this thing when it comes up. I don't have to turn to some professional who's going to go and stick a bunch of things and give me a bunch of stuff to make it go away. Right. I've learned how to manage this on my own. And there's so many things that you can manage on your own. And IFS is a way to manage that, the mental confusion that can happen with all the different parts that are trying to get it, their power. And they're trying to get heard by what he calls the capital S self, or what I call the soul, or what other people, just call the super ego, I think, in Freudian terms. So it's a really fascinating look, and I think it also destigmatizes the voices and the fact that we all have them. We all have these parts. So the more that we befriend those parts of ourselves, the more then we have actual friends, and not enemies that are, telling us the wrong thing to think or do or feel, but that are actually supportive of us and can help us through everything, all manner of life.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I've never heard of that. I'm so excited to know more, and I'm sure our audience feels the same way. So Clarissa, we have to spend some time talking about your very unexpected reunion, as far as where it happened. And also, one of the things we talked about that I thought was so beautiful is your original mom picked a name for you. So can you please include that in your story?
Absolutely. I'll give the abridged version for your listeners, and then I'm writing about this along with just my spiritual journey and the things that I've experienced that are most profound, that I think are universal to people. I'm writing about this in a book that I hope to release sometime in the next year or two, depending on the rest of the process. The finding my birth family, like I said, came later in life because I had to work through finding myself first. I was so lost, ashamed, really just disidentified. I didn't have a good and strong enough sense of myself to take on that emotional journey. And I was also told, like many Korean adoptees, I'm not sure about in your story or for other listeners, but I was told, like many Korean adoptees, that I was abandoned in Korea at a police station, naked with nothing, no information. And then I was brought to an orphanage. So I was a Jane Doe. They just were like, hey, we've got this person. They gave me a name, they gave me a birth date. And that's all the information my parents had. So I was also under the impression that I never would know. How could I, right? They don't have any information. So how could I ever know anything? So I just put it out of my mind. It was an easy excuse to not take that emotional ride. But when my husband and I got married, we were talking about where to go on our honeymoon, and we decided on Korea and Japan. And my husband encouraged me to contact the orphanage when we were going there. He's like, well, you got to contact the orphanage if we're going to go to Korea, and we can see what they have for info, or we can go visit. And I was still, even at that point, even though I was going to Korea for my honeymoon, I was still a little bit reluctant. I'm like, oh, I don't know if I'm ready. But he was super supportive and encouraging. And so I shot off an email, and that started the whole mystery unfolding, because I get back a response with a date to come and visit, and then one line that said, we have information on your birth mother. Where is this coming from? Like, how? What? So that's really where the shock of this whole reunion started, because I never, ever thought that I would have any information. And now I've been told that I've got some information, or they have some information, and it can be mine, and I just have to go there. And so we go there, we get the information from them in Korea. They don't, at least at the time, we went in 2008. At the time, they don't give you your records. And I'm not sure if that's changed at all, but you can't take a physical copy of your records. So we had to sit in this, what felt like an interrogation room, but it's a little tiny little conference room. And I had to just write everything down that they were saying. And the social worker would tell me some things, and then she would stop and she would say, what else would you like to know? It's like,
everything.
Yeah. And then I just had to come up with more questions, and then she would give me answers, and then she would stop again. And so, I was just like, give me everything. And so I'm writing and get as much information as I think that I need or could get or muster at the time. And we, end up going on our honeymoon, coming back home. And then I end up really diving into the research on Korean adoption, talking to other adoptees, and hearing stories that were almost exactly like mine. And that was the second shock was all the information I was given at the orphanage. That was a shock and a half. The third shock was finding out that I was not unique, that there were hundreds and dozens that I was talking to, but just even hundreds and thousands, I'm sure more, that had the same story: abandoned at a police station, or abandoned at a firehouse, or abandoned at a place, and then brought without any information, Jane Doe, Jane John, or I don't know what they call
the boys
male version. John Doe. John Doe, yeah. So Jane Doe, John Doe. And I was a little dumbfounded, going, well, what's going on here? There's more. This isn't just my story anymore. This is a story that spans across what is possibly hundreds of thousands of people, because there's an estimate that there's about 250,000 people, Koreans, who've been adopted out from Korea since the 50s. So possibly hundreds of thousands of people that have been told one thing, but it was actually another thing. So for me, I found out that, we were told, my family was told one thing, and then go there, and all of a sudden I've got all this information, and it's a totally other thing. And my interests obviously peaked around just Korean culture in general, the adoptee community, and learning about that. And so I go to, and with my husband, to an adoptee conference in New York City. And we had been back probably from Korea for about a year, less than a year. It had probably been about 7, 8, 9 months, but still hadn't heard anything from the agency after meeting with them, that they, because once you go, they're like, okay, now that we know you want to find and be reunited, we'll do the work and go and try to find your birth family. So that was the work that I thought they were doing, or that they were doing. And then we're just kind of waiting. And so it was a tense time, because it was a tense, but also exhilarating time, because I'm learning also so much else about the adoptee community and Korean adoptees specifically. So we go to this conference and it's filled with other people just like me, adoptees from all over the world. And so the weirdest thing in the world is walking into a room, seeing people who look exactly like you, but that where everyone's speaking different languages.
That had to be so crazy.
Yeah. So it's just like, oh, this person is just like me, but they grew up in Sweden. And this person is just like me, but they grew up in Australia. And so we're all different in the same way. So there was a thread of a comfort that I'd never had with anybody else, because as much as I identify as white, because I grew up in that's all I know. The only culture I know, and I feel that way very much inside. I still lack a certain, thread of which is all tied to the physical identity and my heritage, and my birthplace. It's all, it's kept me somewhat distant in that respect. And then I've never identified as a Korean, and that feels like a foreign world to me. So being in a room of people who all have those same feelings, who all have the same insecurities around that have developed, and it was just the most comforting place to be. It was really beautiful. So we're at this conference and we have a break, and Mark, my husband, and I go to this cafe, and I'm going through my emails in my BlackBerry, and I get an email, or I see an email from the orphanage, from the agency, saying that they have more information. And I was like, oh my God, Mark. And I scream across the, I'm like, oh, get over here. So he comes over and we read it together, and the email tells me that they had reached my aunt, which I didn't even know I had. That didn't come up in the meeting. So my mother's sister had been reached, and she told them that she didn't know where my mother was. So, okay, bummer. But that the last she knew, she had moved to the United States. So she hadn't been in touch with her for a long time, but she did know that she had moved to the United States. And the last she knew, she was in New York City. And we're sitting in New York City, just reading this, like, what? And so that began at that time. Now we had some power. Now we had some actual chance of also finding her ourselves, because we had felt like the orphanage, that the agency, just with all the stories and all of the lies and all of the subterfuge that sort of was laid out and that you experienced, you just, we stopped trusting whether or not we were ever going to be united through them. So now we were like, oh, we now have the chance of potentially finding her through, because she's here, maybe still in the United States. And so for, I don't know, probably the next half a year, 9 months more, my husband and I went down this rabbit hole of people searching and identity crunching. And he did most of this work. I was still, part of it was I was working, and, but so was he. So that's not even an excuse, but I had a new job. So it was a little bit, taxing on me. But the other real part was that it was too hard for me. I just wouldn't have done the work that was needed and required because of the emotional burden of it. So then it's like, it's too hard. Here's a barrier. I'm going to stop. But he just kept pushing through, and he's just, wielding the internet like a crazed detective is what I called him at the time. Cause I'm like, you're like a crazed detective. I imagine, I don't know. Did you ever see that movie, A Beautiful Mind?
Oh, yes. Yes.
And you remember how he had all the strings?
Yes.
And it all made sense to him, right? He saw this beautiful math and all of the solutions. But when his wife sees it, she was like, oh, whoa.
Yeah, chaos.
Yeah. And it was kind of like what it was like for him, his spreadsheets. I was like, I can't look at that. Yeah. But, he was making sense of a lot of things. And so what that led to was us identifying 3 potential addresses that could be my birth family or tied to my birth family, because we knew that my birth sister, well, one, found out that I had a birth sister through that email from my aunt, and found out then that she had also moved to the United States, and we had her name. And then found out from the aunt's email as well that my mother had been remarried in the United States, and she had his name and the fact that he was a realtor. So we had those facts. And she said that she had a salon in New York. So we knew that. So those 4 and her name. So those 5 bits of information were then what Mark used to like piece together who could potentially be my birth sister and this husband or ex-husband we didn't know. We never found her any information directly tied to my birth mother. It was all through this. Could this possibly is my sister, possibly this ex-husband? So we made a bunch of calls and we reached out, and it was just all dead ends. Nothing materialized. And at that point, I was exhausted, and I also was newly married, and I had this new job, and we moved to a new city, and I was feeling really dejected and feeling rejected again. And it was starting to take an emotional toll on me. And I wanted to celebrate all the stuff that was going on in my life. I had all these beautiful things happening in my life, but I was like down here and also starting to get down here in, that darker place because of everything that we were doing. And so we called off the search for a while. We were just like, let's just take a break. Let's not, focus on this. And, so we did, and we just, went on with our life for a while. And then we decided to have a baby. So we get pregnant, and I don't know if it was myself or Mark, but one of us was like, this is our last chance. And we felt like once we have the baby, we don't, we're going to be so caught up in life. And like, this is our last chance to try to see if we can find her. So instead of making calls and doing whatever, because everything, all those addresses and contacts were in New York. So they weren't far. We lived in New Hampshire at the time. So we're like, let's go down there. And we're like, let's just go.
Road trip.
Yeah. So we book a weekend and we drive down, and we brought, we hooked up with a translator that met us there. And she helped me make a flyer with my little pictures from the orphanage, and wrote it in Korean. And we were going to post those all over this area of Queens called Flushing, which is a very Korean part of Queens, thinking that there might be a lot of people there that don't even speak English very well and or read it very well. So we wrote it in English and she wrote it in Korean. And then she came around with us and we visited those addresses that we had. We're like, we're just going to see what happens. So even though we called this place and they said that she wasn't my sister, let's just go. And so we went to the salon that, showed up in some records and in some, beautiful mind way as potentially my mother's old salon, and met this woman who had my birth sister's name, but and it was the woman we had spoken to, and she reiterated again, no, I'm not your sister. And we knew, because my sister is older than me. So we knew it wasn't her. She was younger than me. But we, had her ask her parents and go back and see, do they know her? Do they know where she may have gone? They had no information. So we left there. And then we go to the husband or ex-husband's address. And it was a business, like a home business kind of address. And we knock on the door, and I had Mark wait in the car because I didn't want him to be freaked out, it was like better if it was like 2 Korean women going up to the door, we thought, than like having this, my husband's white. So, having this, 6-foot tall white guy also come with us. So, and also he couldn't find parking because it's
another issue. Yeah.
Yeah. So we go up and we meet this man. It is him. He was married to my mother. we had spoken to him before, and he still said the same story. I don't know where she is. I don't want to be involved. He was like, he wasn't very friendly, but at least, he spoke to me in English once, and he said, I hope you find her. But he wasn't being very at all helpful, except for the fact that he said the last I knew she lived in Connecticut. We were like, okay, fine, we'll leave you. Bye. And then the last address we had was for my birth sister, if it was her residence. And we go there and find the apartment numbers, and the apartment number for her, just to lend more drama to the whole thing, had just been recently covered over with another last name. We were like, like we just missed her. Oh my gosh. What? And as soon as, Mark's walking away, he's all upset. And I just scanned down the thing, and I see at another apartment number, there's another tape that had been put over that number, and it was her first initial and last name. And I was like, my gosh. And so I was like, oh my God, I'm like, this might be her. And as soon as I said that, the door swings open and someone was walking out. And, in all these apartment buildings, it's all buzzing in types of places. So we were like, oh, hey, thanks. And we walk in, we go to the apartment, and we also had Mark hide around the corner because we didn't want to freak her out. So Grace and I go to the door and knock on the door. This woman answers, and Grace speaks to her in Korean. And I can pretty much, not because I understand Korean, but, just by the fact she used names, I understood what she was saying. She asked, are you my sister's name? And then she said, is your mother my mother's name? And this woman is freaked out by this point. She's like shutting the door on us as she's being asked these questions. And then Grace, the translator, just blurts out, this is your sister. And I was like, wait, Corissa. What? Yeah. And I was freaked because I don't know this woman. I don't know if she knows about me. My mother,
right.
We don't have the same father. My mother had a, illegitimate child. And so I'm freaked out, like, oh, why did you say that, Grace? But the woman throws the door open and she goes, Beauty, which is kind of a familiar way of saying my name. And she starts crying. And I was like, oh my God, you know me? And she's like, oh, of course I know you. I'm your older sister. And she's like, how did you find me? I was like, oh, it's a long story.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, my husband's here too. And so I invite him, and she invites us inside. It was all like, I'm in a state of shock at this point, just going, I can't believe what's happening right now. And we go inside and sit down with her, and we recount the story, tell her how we found her. And we're, crying, and we're trying to, tell the story. And we could get through the kind of bulk of the story, how we ended up at her door. And then she just like kind of dabs some tears. She goes, oh, okay, I'll call Mom. And she just pulls out her phone. And I was just like, it's all happening so fast. And like, whoa. So as much as I knew that was inevitable, as we're sitting there, because I'm sitting with my sister, it just happened just like that. And just like that, by meaning, 2 years later, just like that. But here I am sitting on her floor. She's dialing up my mother, and she's talking to her, and then hands me the phone. And I had no idea what to say. I was still in shock, still emotional, but also closed down because of the shock, but also the whole
gravity of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So she's talking to me in broken English, and I'm just trying to say, yes, it's me. I'm here. And then I just run out of things to say. I don't even know what to say. And I just handed the phone back. I don't even know if I was in mid-sentence. She might've been in mid-sentence. It was just a blur. And I just handed the phone back to her, to my sister. She talks to her more, and talks her into not driving down there, because it was evening and my mother's older and she didn't want her driving down in traffic and at night. So asks, will we go up there? And I was, yeah, of course we'll go up there. Where is up there? Where is she? And she's living in Connecticut. So she was about 2.5 hours from where we were. So we had dinner with my sister and then we drove up and
Corissa.
met her. Yeah, it was crazy. And we drive there and the crazy thing is, also, another crazy thing is I'm pregnant. I'm in my first trimester. And so for those people who are unfamiliar with pregnancy, your first trimester for many pregnant women you're just zapped, no energy. It just like takes all you can to like get up. And I was extremely exhausted in my first trimester. So all the emotion, all the travel. So by the time we get in the car and drive up to her house, I just conked out. So
yeah, it's probably best.
As exciting as it was, I was asleep. My husband's like white knuckle driving up there, like, she's like, asleep? What? And I was like, ah. So we get there and, I wake up and we're there. So that just goes by like that 2.5 hours later, and I'm at her door. And it was the most surreal experience ever. I don't know how to describe it. It was like I was in a dream and observing, but from within inside myself. And I know that that's very true of my emotional state at the time. I think I was in that bubble place that I often went to in my life to protect myself. So I would be kind of like in a mix of in that bubble from within, but then also up here observing from above and just like watching this whole scene. And then I would drop in and like experience it. And then I would like I would pull out in some way. But it was wild. So to get to that story of how she named me. So we're meeting, talking, I have to, of course, tell her how we found her and go through the whole story. And then she pulls out all these photos. And so her whole life, she had kept all of my baby photos and all, photos up until I left. And for me, all my life, I had never had those photos and always felt so like such a missing part of my life, not having had baby photos and, all the things you do in school, like your little your histories and your family trees and all the things that, you feel left out of as an adoptee. And I never had those photos either to know myself or to have seen myself as a baby and as a toddler. And I, got to see these photos of myself that she had. And it was so beautiful. And we're going through them and I'm like crying and looking at them all. And at the end of her pile of photos, there's a picture, there's 2 of them, of my family, of my parents, my adoptive parents. So that was like this full circle, crazy moment. I'm like, you have a picture of my parents? Like, oh yeah, they gave it to me saying, these were the people you were being raised by. And so I'm just sitting there like going, oh, I can't believe this. So at that moment, I asked her, where did my name come from? How did you name me? Because I was given that name, as the Jane Doe, I was given an assigned a name that I knew wasn't mine. But then when I got my records and information, found out what my birth name was, and then she obviously corroborated that and said that she named me because when she was pregnant with me, she woke up in the middle of the night with from a dream of this shooting star becoming huge and just crashing to earth, and it woke her up. And she knew that it was me, was the way she said it. So it wasn't that was the name, that it gave her the name. The way she recounted it was that like she knew that was me, that was actually me coming to earth. And so she named me the Korean word for star, but gave it the honorific form. In Korean, there's actually more than 3 forms of the language, but there's three more well-known forms of the language. And the highest form is the honorific form that you use. You speak to dignitaries or the president or something like that. And so she gave me that name, honorific form of the word star.
Oh, can you tell us what the name is?
It's Bionim.
Oh, that's so beautiful, Corissa.
And that was the name that, the informal version of that name is what my sister used when she greeted me at the door, which was Bieri. And so we're sitting there. The last bit of the story that is also just a wild full circle moment is she tells me this, and she said, I've only had that dream one other time, and it was about 2 months ago. Oh. And I was like, are you serious? And I look at Mark, and we're both like, oh my God, that's when we conceived. 2 months ago. Oh. And she just super matter-of-factly was just like, yeah, it was about your son. Or not, she didn't say son because we didn't know at that time. But she's like, oh yeah, it's about your baby.
Oh my gosh.
We were just like, what is happening here?
Chris, I can't even imagine, how healing that is. And I literally could talk to you for days. Like, you have to come back and tell us more, because you were connected all along somehow, that she actually had pictures. There's so many layers to this. It's just so incredible. Yeah. And, we have so many people out there listening who are going to have their own crazy adventures, Corissa. So what would you like to speak to our audience as we wrap things up? Just what hope do you have for them? What can you say to them as they go through their own journey?
The thing that helped me the most was to know that whatever I found, I had myself, and that I was going to be fine with whatever information and whatever discovery that I came to. And so that reunion with myself, which is really what I discovered through this birth family search, and finding her, finding my sister, finding my story, and just knowing so much now, was incredible. It's such a gift, super profound in my life. But the more profound thing was finding my true sense of self, my home, and knowing that was always with me, that was never going to leave me, that I could leave it, and I had many times in my life, but that it was never going to leave me, this soul, the part that carries me. And we all have that. We all have that place within where we don't need to hide, where that actually supports and wants us to shine. It wants us to be connected fully in our being. It wants us to live our full expression and to live the best life that we can. And it wants us to overcome all of the hardships that are thrown at us, and learn from that, and to not forget them, but to forgive the hardships, and the people and the circumstances tied to it, to allow that soul self, that capital S self, that our inner being and knowing, to be enough for this life and for this journey. And it is. And the more that we entrust that is enough, that we are not our hardships, we're not our burdens, we're not even really our personality.
Right.
Right. I mean, that's just like all these layers of life that are put on us. Right. If I had grown up in Korea, I wouldn't be speaking like this. I wouldn't have this probably form of expression in the way that I talk, and I would be a different person. So it's interesting to have that counter perspective and know that, that's not even me. But I know me deep in, and have connected to that deep sense. And that's what I hope that everyone can get to, in life, whether you're doing a birth search or not, whether you choose to or not, or whether that's even your path, but that we all come to that place of entrusting and aligning and connecting to that highest self.
Oh, Corissa, this has just been an extraordinary time with you. And I can't wait to circle back and hear more about your book. We didn't reveal the title. Maybe we can save that for the next time because the title itself is so amazing.
I would love to.
And as far as I'm concerned, you are a shooting star that is shining so brightly and so beautifully. And thank you for giving your heart and your soul and explaining everything with such beautiful detail and tolerating all my twists and turns with all the different questions. From my heart to yours, thank you so very much.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me on.